What did your boss say that got to your last nerve? Had a boss tell me that the salary adjustment I asked for was more money than he made. The salary adjustment was to bring me closer to the average pay for my job, adjusted to local cost of living and what was closer to what our competitors pay. Then he told me to ask the VP. The VP responded with, "Too high, tell him to try again." I told my boss I'm not negotiating with myself. My boss said I had to talk to the VP. The VP kept messaging me to talk after the time he knew I left every day. I finally set up a meeting and put it in all our calendars. He said it would take 30 minutes. He showed up late. Then he told me I was wrong about the salary, so I showed him my offer letter from our direct and local competitor. I had a non-compete, so I couldn't take the job, and all the national and local data proving I was 20 to 30% underpaid. He then said there was no room in the budget, so I used our pricing system to show him that I personally produced my salary on profit alone in about 2 weeks. He then kept telling me no for over an hour. He told me that even the president gets job offers that pay more, but our work is important. I worked in medical. I finally gave him a super low amount and said anything below this isn't even worth discussing. He repeated there was no room in the budget. I said, "No room?" Disappointing, and hung up. A few months later, I got a new job paying more, and a year later, another new job paying more than I had originally asked for. Apparently, my experience and knowledge is highly sought after. My current company loves me, and I love them. You know, it's amazing how quickly people realize the value of someone when they're about to lose them. Story 2. My dad passed away. He'd been sick, but it was still unexpected. My mom and I had long before booked a 4-week holiday, which now happened to be 1.5 months after his passing. It was perfect timing because I was taking it all pretty badly. When I returned, I had a pretty rough time. I still showed up to work. All my coworkers were very appreciative and understanding, except for my boss. After my first week back, he planned a meeting in which he told me, "I really hope all that stuff with your dad finally got sorted so you can focus on work again." I found another job and left 4 months later. I just stuck it to him later. He called for a meeting around the time I was going to give my notice. I had no idea what it was about, so I decided to keep any info about me leaving up my sleeve, ready for the opportune moment. He spent an hour explaining a new project in which I would be taking the lead. He picked because of his blind trust in me. Note, I was the only one with a suited profile for this job. After his great big speech, I just told him I had better things to do, made him sign the needed documents, and went to lunch with the coworkers. Story 3. Working 24-hour shifts on an ambulance, we used to run to the ground often. On one occasion, we were running calls nonstop from 8 a.m. to midnight without a break. I called dispatch to ask for a break to get some food. There were other ambulances in service, so a 20-minute food break was reasonable. My boss happened to be dispatching, and he denied my request and said, "This is what you signed up for. Just run the calls or you'll be written up for insubordination." Now, mind you, I've been doing this for 5 years at that time. That's when I realized that private ambulances were terrible. I was also his top EMT, and for him to say that was the final nail in the coffin. I got a job at the hospital shortly after working as a tech. Best decision I've ever made. Technically, we are entitled to breaks. The thing that I and a lot of other people failed to do is read the fine print of the paperwork we sign when we get hired. In the EMS industry, there's a clause that says that they are allowed to keep us up to 8 hours after our off time. This is in case we are in a hospital waiting for a bed for a patient. This is also why we do a lot of OT. Story 4. Your performance review was excellent. However, I hate to say this, but we're letting you go. Hands me my excellent performance review letter and the dismissal letter, which states my poor performance. I thanked him and thought about it over the weekend, decided to sue them and called the company's legal rep to let them know. Dumb, I know. Ex-boss called me in for a private meeting with himself and the HR director a few days after that call. So I agreed and recorded them pretty much saying, "We are a multinational company with unlimited resources. You're just one person. You can't afford the legal costs. Just take the severance check and walk away." That made me snap. Went to the Labor Ministry's legal people, let them hear my recordings, and showed them the damning emails I had collected over the years. Their legal team ended up representing me pro bono. At one point, about a month or so into the case, I got a call from someone in the company who threatened to make me homeless. I sent the same emails to a union the next day. Eventually, we settled out of court, but the ministry and union continued and threw the book at the company. Story 5. Off the clock, on my unpaid break, I would often drive to the bank in a fairly busy shopping square about a mile away from my work. The day I had had enough and quit, an elderly woman had gently backed into me, not looking while reversing out of a parking space, while I was in a standstill line to turn out of the parking lot on my unpaid break. There was no damage, but I was furious because I'd just gotten my car back from the body shop a few days prior, and it was expensive. I didn't confront the older lady, and I was late getting back from my break, but ranted about the situation and her lack of awareness to my coworkers when I returned and clocked back in. My boss then popped her head around her office door and stated, "Oh, no one is allowed to leave the property on break anymore. I got an email this morning from the corporate that they changed the policy. It's a safety risk, and things like that can make you late getting back to work too." I demanded to see where the policy was changed, and she said she would show me before I left work, but she had to answer an important phone call, so couldn't show me right then. A few hours later, another manager told me I was getting ready to clock out, that my boss had already left for the day. I told her to consider my final shift, as they cannot dictate what I do if I leave the property on unpaid time. If they weren't paying me, it's my personal time, not company time. I never went back. It's a real shame they couldn't have changed the policy before he had a mini meltdown in the parking lot. Story 6. Worked for a guy who ran a small coffee distribution business, sold and maintained espresso machines, distributed coffee and tea for some good quality sources. He was pretty good at the mechanical side of things, was definitely a coffee snob, but had absolutely no organizational skills and was a terrible hoarder. I was there to organize and help the business run more smoothly, but it was an uphill battle. He ran it out of his own home and it was a mess. The, quote, warehouse was full to the brim with trash, and he wouldn't let anyone touch it. He wouldn't even put a trash can in there. You could barely get to the product, and he would get angry when you implied that the trash needed to be tossed. He had a ridiculous amount of uncollected invoices because he couldn't organize to save his life. After a few months, I was able to successfully collect about $30,000 in invoices that his clients probably never even received bills for. He had a lot of small parts on hand for repairing espresso machines, but because different companies had different names for the same part, and the fact that he was a mess, he never had an accurate accounting of inventory. I streamlined the inventory system and, based on his suggestion, implemented a digital system so he could account for inventory used on site. The problem was he never used the system, and so our inventory was never accurate. When I would point this out, he'd go off about how he couldn't be bothered to do it while he was in the middle of fixing something. He got a contract at a local event to set up a small coffee stall. Getting the equipment and supplies was an absolute nightmare. The equipment was in the warehouse, and he refused to let anyone touch anything in there. When the perishable supplies arrived, there was no space to store them in his fridge because he was a hoarder. I offered to clear the fridge, but he had an attitude and wouldn't let anyone touch the contents that were who knows how old. He ended up angrily doing it all himself. When he finally got the stall up, he tried running it, but he was too bad about the quality of the espresso and didn't have the barista skills to quickly dial in the flavor. I watched him take an order for 2 espressos and then proceed to pour, then toss out about 7 consecutive shots before he was happy with serving it. He probably threw out more shots than he served, and the only thing that was served consistently was the nitro cold brew. It wasn't until he brought in a barista he knew that the stall started to run smoothly. The next day, he witched at me about how he felt that somehow the fact that the stall was run so poorly was my fault. I got up, put my key to the business down on my desk, and told him never contact me again. And I walked out the door. Story 7. During college, I worked at the bookstore on campus, and most of the employees were extremely lazy. I had grown up on a farm, and I remember the first day the other employees telling me not to work so hard, and I politely explained that this was not hard work. There were days I'd finish projects solo because they just stood around and talked. Eventually, my yearly review came up, and the manager there told me I had taught bad habits to other employees, and it took a lot to not comment, like how to work? So I just quit within 2 weeks. Within a month, he was asking me to come back, but I just thought he couldn't recognize who actually got stuff done he wasn't worth working for. Story 8. I was working at the Publix deli and had just started in the kitchen literally 2 days before the Super Bowl. I told my manager, hey, I'm going to need some help in the kitchen on Super Bowl day, or switch me with someone that has more experience. She never did. Mind you, my other manager on such busy days would put 2 of the best in the kitchen together. Day came, I went in with my Red Bull in hand trying to do as good as possible, but I burnt myself a couple of times, and I was starting to get too overwhelmed. I asked for her help, and she said, you should have tried harder. I quit right there on the spot, bought a carton of eggs, and egged the hell out of her car. Story 9. I won Engineer of the Year for our entire region. In my year-end review, I told my boss, these are the things I think I need to improve on, and here's my plan to do it. What else do you have for me? He said, nothing. You've done everything I've asked and then some. So I said, cool. Would that performance come with a promotion to the next tier? His response was, no, we can't promote you 2 years in a row. Flash forward to one of my coworkers who absolutely deserves it, was promoted again after being promoted last year. So apparently that guy can get jumped twice, but your engineer of the year with no feedback given whatsoever is stuck in HR purgatory apparently. Story 10. We were wrapping up a workday and casually talking. It was my boss, my one other coworker, and myself at the time. We were in the detached workshop across the moderately sized backyard from my boss's newly constructed house, and he started casually talking about the trap house he secretly owned and how he would throw parties and get absolutely trashed there, as well as the illicit things that were available there and all the girls he had slept with while partying in his secret trap house, as his wife and 2 kids were enjoying the pool just across the yard. That on top of the poor handling of scheduling jobs and having to commute an hour one way every day, not knowing if I even had work to do that day, it sealed the deal and I took a week off to do some contract work and told him via text that I was done. Story 11. I worked as a new manager and we had a few problem people. We were working to get their pending tasks down to a reasonable number. During a meeting, my boss goes to my counterpart and asks, "What have you done about bad employee number 1? He says, "Nothing yet," and my boss remains silent. Then it was my turn. "Oh, I see bad employee 2 has less outstanding tasks. What are you doing?" I explained that I'm setting 10 tasks a day to be completed on top of their normal tasks. "Well, 10 isn't enough." I quit the next day without a job lined up, which I am the only one doing it, and you didn't say crap to the other supervisor who said he has been sitting on his hand for 2 weeks. I now make $30K more 2 years after that. It's like her boss had a favorite child and a scapegoat. She was definitely the scapegoat. Story 12. One of my first jobs at a gas station. Had been there a few months when almost everyone up and quit and the manager was out on sick leave. For 3 months, we had 3 employees, including myself, running a gas station open from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. with only an assistant manager. It was hell and it seemed like corporations just could not give a crap. Then one day, the district manager comes in and I've got Metallica playing on my phone connected to the stereo. Does this man thank us for our extremely hard work keeping this store from collapsing? Does he reassure us that help is coming or that we'll at least have a manager soon? No, he looked at me and told us, "No music but the radio, turn that off." Then go into the office and shuts the door. I swear to God, my heartbeat jumped to 150 and I just walked out. The drive home was such a freeing feeling. Story 13. Jealousy and my lack of gratitude just made me work harder, smarter, and stronger. His bosses and company leadership respected me and appreciated me, and my boss would get infuriated because he wanted the credit. But fortunately, we had leadership that saw my impact on the P&L, which afforded me to receive large bonuses and accolades and recognition in meetings and company celebrations. He hated me for it instead of being proud of me. It motivated me to try to treat my employees much better, in which I would share my bonuses with my subordinates to show appreciation for their hard work, and their work gave me the recognition. Made me look forward to going to work every day just to crush his fragile ego. Story 14. My chef boss once said, I was a line cook, that he didn't think I was working hard enough because he didn't see me running around in a panic during rushes. I pride myself on having my mise en place repaired well and can multitask very well. So I'm not stressed out and can focus on ensuring food quality as quickly as possible without running around like an idiot, potentially causing an accident or making a mess. He said he didn't care and wanted me to move around more despite my ticket times being excellent. I quit very soon after. That guy ran a horrible kitchen, but it was close to home, so I gave it a try. Story 15. Had a boss whisper to a coworker, if he doesn't like recent stupid change to policy, he should just quit. For context, I'd been there for years, was a core member of the crew, and had a ton of regulars. Leaving work that day, a coworker told me and I bailed on that place so fast. Other people slowly started leaving too, then they had to go through the and ended up shutting down. Meanwhile, I had gotten a better job and my life immediately improved, and we managed to come out of the other side of 2020 stronger. Don't put up with toxic bosses. Story 16. The department I was transferred to, not of my own will, I was told I would be transferring, was originally run by 4 people. Then it was just me and one other person. Then that other person quit. I ended up running a $12 million section of the business all on my own. I was also doing project engineering when I was only titled and getting paid as a design engineer. I went to my manager and said, okay, I'm running this entire section of the business. What's my new title and pay going to be? They told me it wasn't in the budget right now and we could talk about a raise in November. It was June. I simply said, okay, and got up and left the meeting. I had a new job by July 11th. I love my new job. I get a sizable raise every year. My boss is awesome and the work-life balance is amazing. I'm literally kicked out of the building at 5. Story 17. I'm an eye doctor, and I was eyeballing, pun intended, a practice to purchase after 15 years in one practice I did not wish to purchase. The owner, my boss, was aware of my disinterest in her practice. I was working half day a week in the prospective practice and making solid plans to move forward with a contract and bank loan for the new place. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the two owners of the prospective office called me to tell me that they had a buyer. This was literally the day I was going to apply for my loan and sign a contract. The bid was not something I could match. I could mortgage my home, cash it out, add it to my bank loan, and I would still not remotely meet the new bid. I asked them, how could this happen? And they told me that they were scouted by this large company and had an, quote, interaction with a person I was very familiar with. This person was the spouse of my current employer who recognized that I might buy this practice and deliberately recommended this location for the group to buy so that I wouldn't leave the practice. At the time, I was making the bulk of the money for the practices and managing them all clinically. I left, of course, but I did confront them about it, to which they confessed that they knew about my plans and they deliberately interfered. Joke's on them, that group hired me and now I'm making more than I was working for her and working fewer hours. Story 18. Now my direct boss, but an office manager at my job, sends out hostile messages whenever she's in our office about things we aren't allowed to do anymore. 2 weeks ago, she sent out an aggressive email saying we weren't allowed to touch the office fax. Apparently, someone misplaced some important referrals, and instead of telling us where these go or trying to provide training, she sent out a high priority message saying only support staff can touch the fax machine. Sounds reasonable until you realize we need to fax sensitive documents to APS and CPS, and we have a strict policy that states we can't have support staff fax these documents. I called HR and asked why I'm trusted enough to go to clients' homes but not enough to touch a fax machine. Prior to this, her brilliant ideas consisted of buying a $3,000 stamp machine we can't use because she thinks we'll break it, putting two $2,000 desks in each office when we don't have the staff to justify two people in our offices, and spending $5,000 on a laminator. We're a nonprofit social service program. Why do we need a $5,000 laminator? BTW, it hasn't been used in 2 years. My personal favorite was when she told us men and women can't share an office, made two people share an office when we have 4 empty offices, and gave herself an office despite only being in our office 2 times a month. She's an idiot. Story 19. My dad had been living with cancer for a year and then got the terminal diagnosis. I took a leave of absence for 4 weeks to get as much taken care of as possible during that time, because my mom was in no condition to manage finances, end-of-life care, and all the heavy stuff that came with it. It helped with the cremation, care, and arrangements. I also performed the service for his funeral from start to finish. It was a lot, to say the least. My boss called me at 8:30 the morning after the funeral to ask when I was coming back to work. I worked alongside him for 12 years. He never showed up to the service. The rest of the team, plus people from distant offices, even came. I quit with 2 days' notice and changed careers. And if you're enjoying the video, learning a thing or two, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 20. We have a remote satellite office that allows us to stop in, send, receive data, and communicate with the main office without having to drive the 40 to 60 minutes back to the main office. It's good, but it's become a crutch for the engineers because they know they don't have to work to a deadline. They can just send through the data at whatever ungodly hour they like. One time, the satellite office was scheduled to be moved. It's not brick and mortar, it's built to be moved around. During that move, the office experienced an acute case of being upside down, with all the computing and other office equipment still inside. It was brought up in an interdepartmental meeting that as a result of the whole, quote, upside down office saga, we had lost all capability to communicate remotely and would therefore need the engineers to work to a deadline and provide the data we needed with a suitable lead time. The area manager and engineer said, well, we're not here to baby people. Story 21. Our company name ends in an S. Let's call it Big Products. When we talk about things that are ours because of that closing S, the possessive apostrophe just sits on the end. Big Products, new widget, Big Products, managing director, etc. Our marketing manager decided she did not like the way adding the apostrophe looked, so she instructed us to simply stop using it. We've tried pointing out that she can't just change grammar for aesthetics, but she doesn't understand. There's a few workarounds we've been using, quote, the managing director of Big Products, unquote, etc. But that becomes very long-winded and inelegant in text after a few instances. Our choice now for everything is to issue these lengthy, twisted workarounds or incorrectly drop the apostrophe. all because she doesn't like the way it looks. Story 22. I was introduced to the new manager. I'll try to keep it short, but here's a backstory. The company has 3 stores. Let's call them A, B, and C. A is the original store and also the depot, so it's always been the highest earning store. It's also the biggest, with 5 fitters, 5 office staff, and 2 warehouse staff. B is the smallest store and has the worst earnings due to its location. It gets less foot traffic, has 1 office and 2 fitters. C is the newest and farthest away from the CBD, but its location allows little to no competition, so it does well. It has about 3 fitters and 2 office workers. I worked at A for a few years doing 3 people's jobs, but only getting paid for 1 role. One day, I asked for a pay raise of $1.30 per hour as my rent had gone up and got rejected. The manager and I also kept clashing heads, so I moved on. About 2 years later, I got a call asking if I was looking for work as the manager's role was being available at A, and they were really desperate for me to come back as I had the most knowledge for the role, having basically done it before I left. I agreed to come back, but refused to work at A while the old manager was still there. So we all decided I'd go work at B for 9 months as a fitter, then move to A as a manager. After about 7 months working at B, we got an email from the top brass congratulating us on a job well done, blah, 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 blah. Confused, we looked into it and found out that we were projected to surpass A for annual income by a large margin, something that had never been close to happening before. The following Tuesday, I got a call from the CEO asking if I could move to A earlier than agreed. As a fitter, then once the manager leaves, I'd start that role. I figured I might as well, considering it was only 2 months until I'd be there anyway. The following Thursday morning, the CEO walks into B with someone by his side. I assumed it made sense to put my replacement in here as early as possible. We greeted each other, and about 2 minutes into the conversation, the CEO came out with, "Yeah, so basically I'm just showing him around the stores before he starts up next week at A." Confused, I said, "Oh yeah, what have they got you doing up over there?" To which the CEO replied, "He'll be taking over from Mike, the old manager." I thought of every reason as to what I did wrong, but nothing made sense. Turns out the new guy was an old friend of the CEO who had just lost his job and was looking for work. Story 23. Started working at this company where colleagues informed me on the first day that the manager is really toxic and understands no work-life balance. I tried to ignore this and focus on understanding the project. Then things began to unfold. Crazy steep deadlines, leave denials, snarky remarks like "don't try to do it, get it done," and micromanagement. I literally had to beg for an extra day for every milestone. The worst part is that as soon as I used to leave the office, this guy's stooge would call, stating a critical bug in the system that needed immediate resolution. I've worked in an hour-long auto rickshaw ride, reached home by 8 p.m., and resumed working at 8:05 p.m. for a bug that wasn't even a bug, merely a misunderstanding on the client's part. Mid-year discussions came, and he said, "Not a team player, not flexible on work timings." I immediately escalated to HR and dropped my notice. I had a 45-minute discussion with HR, him, and the VP about the complaint, which basically led to him getting a well-deserved earful. On my last day, the dude had the audacity to say, "Keep in touch." The dog in me forced me to yell out, "Let's not." I learned a very important lesson from my 6-month stay there. If you don't set your boundaries, someone else will. Apologies for the long story. I'm not a regular commenter. Story 24. I worked at a troubled teen center for girls. We got a new intake on the weekend, which usually doesn't happen. The client came in after her parents dropped her off. Turns out she was spiked as a kite, and they just told us, "Just let her come down and watch her." FYI, we were mentors, not medical staff. I, being male, was tasked with a one-on-one with her, which shouldn't happen. It should have been a female staff member. I wasn't comfortable with this. We didn't know what she was on, and there were no medical records or history yet. I started to get mad and started messaging managers directly, telling them to hand over her information. Something was telling me not to go one-on-one with her. What this means is I watch her, walk wherever she goes, and if she tries to hurt herself, I have to restrain her. Again, something like this should have been handled by female staff. Now, why did I get a weird feeling? Turns out this girl had been mistreated by a male around my age and height. I was angry. This girl was spiked and had this past. She could have made up a lie about me and screwed my life up. I was livid with my boss. I was one of their top mentors and had been there for a while. I loved taking care of these girls. I saw them as my kids. But thanks to horrible management, he put me in a position I couldn't forgive. My contract stated I could quit at any time without 2 weeks' notice. I called my boss, explained everything. All he said was it was unacceptable. I said I quit, and he tried to get me to stay. I hit him with, "Will anything change in 2 weeks or a month?" He was silent for the response. I said, "That's my answer. I quit because you can't keep your staff safe." Everyone I worked with quit after. They all agreed with the safety concerns. I was the last person anyone thought would quit, so it was a huge shocker to the facility when I left. Those troubled girls deserve so much better. Also, you learn a lot of girls there because some parents just can't parent, so they blame the girls and send them to those centers. Story 25. I work in trades. The supervisor and I were driving by a project, and he said, "So and so works there now, and he runs the job. He just got his license, and he doesn't think he knows enough to do it." Without asking the supervisor, he proceeds to tell me that I have more experience and years than that job runner, but he doesn't think I could run a job because I don't know enough. I don't know the code enough, and I can't do it because I haven't been trained to do it. Proceeds to ask me, "Well, do you think you can do it?" To which I replied, "I'm not sure I want to." He says, "That's not what I asked you. Do you think you can do it?" I've been a lead hand ever since becoming a journey person 8 years ago. Whenever put in a position, I found a way, regardless of if I think I can. I've written and passed my contractor's exam as well. I know a fair bit, and I'm honest enough to admit things I have no clue on. I've talked to many people about this, and they all think it's just chest puffing and talking me down to keep me where I am, instead of climbing the ladder in life. Story 26. It wasn't what they said, it was what they didn't say. I was at a fintech company where I was one of 2 people actually producing work and results. Out of 10 people supposed to be selling, only 2 of us were. Yet, I was the one getting flack even though I was bringing in sales. I got the news that a friend, only in his 30s, had passed away. It was a shock. Then 2 days later, I learned that 2 other friends, also in their 30s, had passed away on their honeymoon. Then my best friend's aunt passed away. In 1 week, I lost 4 people, 3 of them my age, and all completely unexpected. Over the next week, I had to attend wakes and funerals all during the week, so I submitted time off requests with explanations. Not a single word. They somehow managed to double down. I figured maybe they were so overwhelmed they didn't know how to respond, so they chose to say nothing. But no, while I was out at one of the funerals, I started getting bombarded with messages about a deal that was 1, not urgent, 2, fully documented, and 3, already handled. Upon my return, I completely checked out. Story 27. He hired me as a team lead but was never actually around, so I just did most of his day-to-day job for him. He was an absentee dad to the program who would just wander through the office once or twice a week, sprinkling BS tasks on everybody, and then vanish back into the ether. He would complete his busy work and then email him asking for feedback and never get it. After I started in October, this went on until he scheduled a meeting just before lunchtime on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and the team cornered him in this meeting and made him answer all of our questions. I got the team to make slides and everything so he couldn't just skip over things he didn't want to talk about. He grew increasingly irritated by us, wanting him to tell us how to do the crap he asked us to do, until he just got up and walked out as a kid who was presenting was mid-sentence. We thought this meant we were going to take 5, but he cruised back into the conference room a minute later to find us all checking our phones and really let us have it for, quote, being on our phones and not paying attention in his meeting. We all kind of looked at each other and grumbled a response, and one of the guys looked up at everybody all stunned and said, "My aunt just passed away. I have to go call this funeral home in Chicago and figure out how to get her back to Mississippi for a funeral." Schmuck looks him straight in the eye and says, "That's not what we're working on here right now. You need to put your phone down." The whole team just kind of stares at him in disbelief for 30 seconds and gets up and walks out. I sat there with him long enough for him to stare at his notebook and I, quote, "shouldn't have done that," and get up and leave the office. He never apologized to the guy. That was 2 years ago this month. The program has a 200 to 300% turnover. Schmuck ghost quit. The customer canceled the program and the team went from around 25 at its peak to 4 as of yesterday. I quit in August. Schmuck told a guy I'm still friends with there that he was going to try being nice at his next job because being a tyrant wasn't really working for him. Story 28. This was a long time ago, so I can't remember the exact words, but I'll paraphrase. Long story short, it was the 3rd week where I was finishing up a crazy dinner shift on a Saturday. The night shift cook called out. I'd used to run the night shift, so the previous 2 weeks I was asked to cover through the night, essentially a 20-hour shift of cooking and cleaning, and I had agreed to do it. I understand that the night shift cook was being placed in a difficult situation due to a failing relationship. I respected him, so I was okay with covering. However, in this 3rd week, I just didn't have the energy or the desire to do it. I said no. That would have left the current shift manager as the one responsible for covering or closing if that is what they decided. A short while later, the shift manager came up to me because the GM wanted to speak to me. He begins to scream at me over the phone saying how I was lazy and not a team player, how I was screwing him over and that I wasn't worth the money he was paying me, so he's going to knock me back down to minimum wage. I told him to make it zero instead because I quit. The next day, I got a phone call from his boss asking me if I'd reconsider or even just work at a different location temporarily. I declined the offer. Several months later, I got a call from one of my former coworkers to catch up. I asked him how things were going there. He told me that he had no clue because he quit as well. According to him, they tried having him take up all of my responsibilities, and he told me that he never realized just how much I did until they were trying to pull the same crap with him. There are so many more layers to my time at that job, and I'm fairly certain my boss was stealing from the business. He was definitely breaking some labor laws as well. I naively only reported him to HR as I left because I didn't know any better at the time. Story 29. He didn't say it to me, but a friend at work told me what he said to her. After the work group chat kept getting a load of messages complaining about how the night staff didn't do X, Y, and Z, all menial tasks like filling pots with water and lining trays with baking parchment so morning staff didn't have to do them. I put a message in the chat asking if morning staff could do actual jobs they would regularly leave for the people who came in on changeover. Stuff like emptying the bins, cleaning their work area, or cleaning out empty veg containers instead of leaving them. I thought it was pretty fair to ask them to do the jobs they were supposed to if they wanted us to do extra for them. Anyway, my manager told my friend that I was just angry because I wasn't getting some. I quit a few weeks after that when one of the morning staff made me do half of his job for him when I got put on a morning shift one time. Handed my notice in on a used receipt that just said, I quit. Story 30. New guy became our department's boss. Mind you, he wasn't new in the company, just wasn't our boss. Calls everyone in for meetings one-on-one. I used the opportunity to speak about my main problem within the company. Lack of evolution when it comes to earning. My pay was way below what I needed to make with my degree, and I hadn't received a bump up in 5 years, not for my lack of asking. Every time I'd hear the answer would be, can't now, we'll see next year, just work hard and show us what you can do. So every year I did just that, took on new tasks, etc. I tell him, and what does he say? I don't know what you're capable of yet, maybe next year, just work harder. My team leader was there and I looked at her expecting her to at least defend me and tell him what I had done the last years. Nothing. He then told me degrees meant nothing without experience, been working there for 10 years, and I was just done. Story 31. We need to think about the team, they say. I work in a customer support role with questions coming in 24/7. I've been working Wednesday to Sunday, while Monday and Tuesday were my days off. This meant the team had weekend coverage and they could enjoy their time off. In addition to answering incoming questions, I also had long-term projects to support. There would be meetings held on my off days, so I would flex my time from Wednesday to Friday when most of the team was working. I'd been doing this for about a year when my manager retired. The new manager didn't care too much for me, flexing my time to support project meetings. He told me, we need to think about the team. When I'm flexing time, I'm not available and it's not fair to the team, around 14 people, to have to pick up my workload. I had always thought of myself as a team player, working weekends and on my days off to support projects, but apparently I was never part of his team. Story 32. When my boss refused to see that one of the dispatchers that everyone else complained about was the problem, we were the issue for having the problems. Said dispatcher constantly micromanaged and needed to be involved in everything. True, final straw was me taking a phone call, the dispatcher interrupting me for, quote, info about that phone call. Put the customer on hold while she explained everything for 5 minutes and I, quote, listened. After she was done talking, I said, I don't appreciate being interrupted while doing my job. Also, everything you just said in the last 5 minutes has literally nothing to do with this phone call. If I need your help, I'll ask for it. Go back to your desk and focus on your own crap. Next day, I got written up for insubordination and I put my 2 weeks in with no job lined up. Story 33. Heavily implied because the supervisor was the cowardly type to never be direct and would imply things or tell other people so they could tell you that I was not being a team player despite me constantly picking up extra duties and sacrificing. My body had a major back surgery that I am still not nearly recovered from over a year ago. My mental health from the stress of the job, which caused me to gain 20 pounds, and sometimes resort to using prescribed sleeping pills for a decent night's sleep. My family, by me missing family engagements or constantly staying late to try and be the good employee. And my emotional health by my self-worth being constantly eroded from the overall bad working environment. I actually had an interview later that afternoon and accepted the position. Had previous offers for other positions prior to that day, but this opportunity showed up and checked all the boxes. My family and I have been extremely happy ever since, and I'm not at a position where my supervisor values me and what I do. Story 34. I got written up for finishing a job that had been bid for 4 people over 6 days with a day of travel on each end with one other person in 2 days. He had personally bid the job himself and told me it made him look stupid. Later that year, he started chastising me about not putting enough detail into my time card, field service, and that he needed to know what I was doing throughout the day. As someone who doesn't like micromanagement, I started adding time blocks for every task I performed throughout the day when I'd use the bathroom, when I'd smoke, when I'd talk to employees of the locations I was dispatched to, when they'd ask me stupid questions. I put what I'd had for lunch. He had to manually approve each time block. After a week of this, much to my delight, I was laid off. I collected unemployment, participated in a paid medical study for 10 days, made $6,000, bought a ski pass, and took a winter off. Screw you, Jay. Story 35. Worked at a truck stop Popeyes. I'd been there for 3 years, was the closing shift lead. Every year, I'd get a 30 to 40 cent per hour raise, only to watch minimum wage go up by the same or more, and just go back to making, effectively, minimum wage. We went through a struggle on hiring for a bit, eventually hiring a new cook that was making more than I was. I was being paid less to train this guy than the guy I was training. Asked the store manager about getting a pay raise to something more respectable, and he replied with, "We can discuss it during your review next year." I just stopped going to work after that. In hindsight, it was the best thing that could have happened. I was overcommitted to a terrible job, and my next one I made almost double the hourly wage within 2 years. And just for the record, my beef was not with the new hire. When you're struggling to hire, you absolutely should rethink how much you pay your employees. My beef was with them incentivizing new hires but refusing to reward employees who stayed. Story 36. I was hired at a company to help start a 3D printing department as well as help their CNC group. Over a year, the company didn't put money into doing these things. I ended up doing construction drawings. One day, a coworker who knew my background in CNC asked me for help. When I was done with my work, I sent my boss a message saying I was done.